Hello, and welcome back to Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. I'm your co-host, Lance A. Slatton, also the host of All Home Care Matters and the co-host of the Care Advocates and the Caregivers Journal, and the author of the All Home Care Matters Official Family Caregivers Guide. We are excited to welcome you back today as we're kind of talking about the holiday realities and what now. We're excited to welcome Mr. John Sweeney. John, if you'd like to take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay. Well, I just completed my 95th birthday, and the fact that I'm still standing up surprises a lot of people. I was married for almost 72 years until I lost my wife to dementia. But out of that marriage came 10 grandchildren and now 12 great-grandchildren, and I'm a retired implement dealer.
Welcome, John. Well, thank you so much for being here. And as always, I get to welcome my esteemed co-host, Miss Lori La Bey, the co-founder of Dementia Map, the founder of Alzheimer Speaks, and the author of Betty the Bald Chicken. Welcome, Lori.
Well, I am thrilled to be here as always. This is so much fun to have these conversations that we do over and over. And today's conversation, I think, is going to be really very interesting because we're going to be talking about, the holidays and what happens next, because a lot of times there's a lot of regrouping that occurs during the holidays, reassessing of how our elders and loved ones are doing, and perceptions aren't always the same within families. And so I think this will be something that really kind of gives a calmness, thinking, okay, I'm not the only family going through this. And oh, theirs goes sideways sometimes too, as well as ours when we're not all on the same page. And also seeing that, these evaluations that sometimes happen and, adjustments to the holidays are really beneficial, and everyone's trying to work in the best interest of keeping things as much the same as possible, and yet beneficial to the individuals that they may be concerned about. And, when you are able to look at it from a love side versus you're taking my independence away, it makes it, much easier to deal with. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am too. John, I'm going to start the conversation off with some questions for you. You said you're 95 years old young, which, that is a huge achievement. I hope we can all live to see that 95th birthday.
Club.
Very exclusive. And we'll have to have you back to celebrate your 100th when that rolls around. But, you've been around for a lot of holidays. Like you said, you were married for almost 72 years. Your wife was diagnosed and eventually passed with dementia. I got to imagine that changes the complexity of holiday time. Family gatherings, celebrations, probably drudges up some good memories and maybe some, bittersweet memories for you. What do you look forward to when the holidays are coming?
Well, that's a fairly hard question to ask. Just time with the family. Probably will not have time with my family right on Christmas Day, but we always have celebrations we did a week or so ago, and it's just fun to be with them. I miss some of the things about the holidays, though, when the families were under the same roof, when the children were little, or when my children were young parents and bringing grandchildren over. At this age, I don't see them as much now during the holidays.
Yeah. What is there anything that you really dread or that causes you anxiety, either now or in the past, with your changing dynamics? The family's getting older. Your wife is not there to celebrate. Is there anything that you really dread or that causes you anxiety?
No, I think not, Lance. I just, like I say, I understand why I can't be with the whole family, because they're scattered and they have their own thing to do with their grandchildren and things. But I don't suffer a lot of anxiety. I talk to them a lot, text with them a lot, and
That's great. when did you first start noticing that the family gatherings were starting to change, and did you understand or know why at that time?
No, I didn't. I did sense that they're less since my wife passed. The family was a lot more attentive then, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory manner, but well, such things as when she was still alive, we used to have Zoom calls with the family every Sunday night. That's kind of tapered off, and I don't see my adult children more than 3 or 4 times a year.
Are they scattered different areas, or is it just their lives are busy
I
with?
have 5 children, and 4 of them are live in and around the Twin Cities. One lives in Toronto.
Um, I would have to imagine that things needed to change, once your wife was diagnosed with dementia. I'm sure any family caregiver or anybody that has, been touched by dementia can appreciate that. How did your family handle the gatherings?
Well, when Virginia started at the point where she no longer knew a lot of the people, didn't even know her grandchildren, her daughter, we put name tags on them.
Mm.
And so this is your granddaughter, Kelly, this is your grandson, Andrew. And because at family gatherings, one time she came to me and said, "That young gal over there is going to show me where the bathroom is." Well, that young gal was her beloved granddaughter. Yeah, so that's kind of how that changed. We had to work around it.
Yeah, yeah. And I got to imagine for the grandchildren that weren't maybe old enough to understand what grandma was dealing with, that was, I would assume, confusing to them.
It was, however, most of our because of our age, most of our grandchildren were adults, had families of their own when she was diagnosed. So it's not like a small child that couldn't understand. Most of them probably had read some about dementia and were not totally surprised by all aspects of it.
Mhm. Did the family or did you guys maybe implement or start a new kind of tradition once your wife was diagnosed at Christmas? Just knowing that, every Christmas could be the last Christmas.
Yeah, I don't know that we did anything different other than tried to show her love and affection, and of course she didn't understand everything that was going on.
No, well, I appreciate you being here, John, as always, and sharing your story and your experience, and I'll even say expertise, because I feel like anybody that's lived through it and has been a caregiver for that loved one with dementia, they become an expert, and so we do appreciate you taking the time with us today. I'm gonna.
On the job training.
It's on the job training, that is for sure, and I'm gonna pass it to Lori, and I know Lori's got some questions here too.
Yeah, I'm gonna add some comments to the questions that you asked, John, because I hear from so many other people too, and I thought that might be helpful for our audience. So, when you asked John, did he look forward to the holidays? And I would say probably 95% of the people I talk to, that is a huge thing. They want those gatherings, unless families are really dysfunctional, they're really looking forward to that. But then sometimes after that passes of being excited, there's sometimes in some families and in some individuals, again, because it depends on personality styles, can get anxious, like what's going to happen this time. Is everybody going to get along? And depending on where it is, are they hosting? Because sometimes the kids don't come in and take over hosting, and that's still put on the parents. And that's a lot of work, but it's always been done, and they've always made it look so easy, and they've never complained. And so no one steps in a lot of times, and that can cause a lot of stress. So I would encourage families to talk about that, because not everybody brings something. Some families just do it all in their house. Other times, people go, we go out to eat now, or we order in. to lessen, the stress and strain of anybody having to cook and prepare. And, things have changed in that fashion. I also hear from a lot of seniors that as much as they love getting together and they really look forward to the grandkids and sometimes even the great grandkids, they talk about maybe needing a plan to being able to pull themselves out of the room if it gets too, especially I'll use, Christmas or as an example, if things get too high toned and too pitchy and there's too much excitement, that can be overwhelming. Or they worry about, can I hear? If they're having hearing problems and they want to engage, but sometimes they're just nodding and smiling and really not being part of the conversation. So I hear those conversations from people, and I think a lot of times those are overlooked. Even with driving, if it's not at your place and our seniors are driving, sometimes they will focus on the weather and they'll be watching that like a hawk because they can get really nervous, or how do I get there without going on the freeway? So being able to pick somebody up can sometimes help with that portion. So that I just wanted to throw those things in there. And then families use all kinds of terms as the family kind of starts stepping in and they are giving advice in terms of what they're noticing, or they take over without kind of asking at times, thinking they're helpful, and it can be offensive sometimes to people. So I think we have to be gentle with that. And then, John, you said your family didn't make a lot of adjustments, especially even with Virginia, who was living with dementia, other than the name tags and things. But a lot of families will find that a person with dementia can't do the big groups. And so they'll start meeting in smaller groups. And some families will do a big group, but maybe a person, depending on their situation, an elder, and again, dementia is a good example of that, won't attend the big group, but they'll attend the multiple little groups because it's easier to engage. I've seen people change even table settings where there's not as many glasses and things to knock over, not as many pieces of silverware for if someone's doing a really formal dinner. I've seen people, and again, every family's different. There's no right or wrong. Going to maybe more finger foods. So a person who has mobility issues can still eat by themselves, or just, easily getting a plate prepared and then pre-cutting it for someone. So when it's delivered to them, it's all set and ready to go if those are issues. So there's lots of different ways to be able to adapt and still hold on to traditions, but I know it can be tough. I remember, and this is it kind of in a reverse change of traditions, when my older brother was the first to get married, and my mom did not want any of her holiday traditions changed. And she gave my sister-in-law, a run for her money, because, we always do it on this day, but then, her family did it on the same day. And then we ended up having to rotate, and could we merge families? And my mom was like, absolutely not. This is our time. And so there can be those pushbacks in all of these situations. So how do you have those conversations? So those are just the things that I wanted to add on that. But I do have a slew of questions for you as well. One is, when did you notice that the parenting roles were reversing? Because that's one thing that the seniors talk about. It's like, what happened? And sometimes it can be a shock, and sometimes it can happen very slowly, and sometimes they can be part of this decision. Other times they're not. And again, every family handles it a little bit different. But how did it work for you? And did you feel that at all to begin with?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and there were several instances. One that may not have been one of the first ones where I learned, but my daughter from Canada was visiting, and she was looking for some mayonnaise. And she got in the refrigerator and she got mayonnaise for her sandwich, but she made the mistake of looking at the expiration date and went ballistic. every can and bottle in the house got turned up and a bunch of them thrown out. So, and, and then one other time, I have a thing. It's a magnetic envelope on the side of the refrigerator with pertinent medical information. And one time she says, "Daddy, if the EMT came, would they have a way of knowing, critical information?" "Oh, yes, and that's taken care of. Our landlord gives us this magnetic thing, and we put stuff in there. Let me see it. Not, may I see it, or would you like me to look at it? Let me see it." Well, it was hopelessly out of date. Now I have a note on my calendar that every 6 months I change that because I don't want another berating. I'm joking a little bit, but and they kind of take their turns parenting their father.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it can be, getting together can be just a normal visit. It can be an undercover investigation where the kids have been chattering and they're all going to kind of step in and observe. And then other times it can be very open, going, "Hey, I want to look at your medications," or "Let's talk about this," or "Review your legal documents." And then, the whole plan of attack in terms of, okay, now we have this information. What do we do with it? And, I've seen, some families where they don't include the senior in these decisions at all.
Our family has had sibling dinners, and you can imagine who was the subject of the conversation.
Yeah, what started those? Yeah.
Just another funny little incident. When Virginia and I did a lot of traveling, and when she passed, I missed that. In the last few years, we couldn't do it. So I renewed my passport, and I had a burning desire to go back to Ireland one more time before I die. My oldest son really, he said, "Dad, I'm not comfortable with you traveling over there solo at your age." And he said, "If you wait till next year, Chris and I will take you," because they were planning a trip at that very same time, so they couldn't. And I said, "Well, I know there's risk. It's minor, but if I'm going to die, I want to have a smile on my face when I die." So we got off the case, but just coincidental, absolutely coincidence. 2 days later, my daughter called and said, "Daddy, Tom and I would like to go to Ireland with you." Hogwash. Their brother got on and leaned on her and said, "You are not going to let that old fool go over there alone."
Oh, but how nice that they're talking and they're concerned and they're looking for remedies together. And I know you get along well with all your family members. For some people, that might not work. They might not get along all that well. And to begin with, and then to come on vacation, it kind of takes the fun out of it at times.
It actually would have been a pretty good deal. And then he got aborted because of my son-in-law had a health issue. It had to be treated at that time. But then we could have rented a car, and I had set out a self-directed itinerary. But if I go over there, I can't rent a car at my age.
Oh, see, no, I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think most places they trigger it at about 75, and then you have to have a note from your doctor.
Okay. Well, and then you're driving on the opposite side of the roads and
right.
all of that stuff over there too.
But even if you were going someplace where you're on the same side of the road, they don't want older people driving their cars.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's something I was not aware of. Were you, Lance?
No, I was not. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
And it's not just family that kind of defer to you and patronize you, but when we were in Croatia, one of our events was to drive dune buggies, and it wasn't a dangerous thing. We drove up through beautiful vineyards overlooking the Adriatic, and and my friend and I jumped in the front seat, and the man came and said, "Folks, we have a driver if you'd like one." I said, "No, I can drive." "Okay. Well, all right, but just want to assure you that we do have a driver." Then he went around to see everybody had the seatbelts hooked, and then come back one more time and just assured me that if he'd have known how old we were, he'd have taken the keys away from it.
Well, and those, I mean, people can kind of go crazy on those dune buggies and stuff too. So it depends on how you're going to drive, you know.
Right. No, I understand that, but it's just if you have wrinkles in your face, people do treat you a little different, not just family.
Mm-hmm. No, no. Well, and then like you said, with businesses, they're looking at liability issues. Oh, you know, now you're on my property or you're using my equipment, or, you know, all of those things come into play. I have a story on travel, and this was kind of funny. And it made me slap myself in the face for not even realizing I was doing this, because I was caring for my mom with dementia, my dad with brain cancer. And, you know, my mom was very passive, and she was just happy to hang out with whatever. And my folks would, you know, routinely get together with their friends. But I would always go over and make sure that they were groomed, make sure my dad had enough money, all of those things. And then they would go out and they would primarily reminisce with their friends, you know, who they've been friends with for, you know, 50, 60, some even longer than that, years. And they came home one day and said, we're going to go to Texas. And I thought my head was going to explode, going, there's no way, because at that point, there was no way either of them could maneuver traveling. But they weren't aware of that. And their friends said, well, they look fine, you know. And I realized I wasn't sharing honestly what was going on with my mom's dementia, because, and I think this happens with families many times. They come to visit, and one person will go, oh my gosh, they're really having trouble here. And then somebody will stop in for a 15-minute or an hour visit. Go, they were fine. We had a great conversation. But most of it is talking about a lot of past things and things that are really comfortable, and they're not seeing a full day of how things are functioning and stuff. And that can cause a lot of problems sometimes, you know, within families there. I wanted to just pull Lance, and I would imagine you've heard of some situations or seen of some situations, Lance, giving, you know, you have a home healthcare company.
Yeah, you know, every family is different. You know, you like to see the families that are understanding and accepting, and especially when the spouse of the loved one with dementia is, you know, still in the home and still kind of maintaining the household and the care for their spouse. But sometimes they need that encouragement. And, you know, like you said, Lori, you acknowledge that you weren't necessarily sharing the whole picture. A lot of times, especially at the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Easter, you name it, families aren't coming around like in person as often, but then they get those, you know, 1, 2, 3 days or longer with their parents, and they're starting to witness things more firsthand, like, you know, the expired mayo in the fridge and the other items that, you know, the perishables that are no longer good. That's a lot of times the first reality for the family members, because often the spouse is so protective of the person they're caring for, their wife or their husband, and wanting to, you know, respect their independence and their integrity. And, you know, and there's a fear component often, what we see anyways, where, you know, they're afraid, well, the kids are going to put us in a home, you know, they're going to put us and take away our keys. And, you know, meanwhile, it's just the one spouse that is maybe having some difficulties, but the other spouse is pretty self-sufficient and independent. And so, you know, the holidays can be a very difficult time depending on the component and the makeup of the family and the relationships. You know, if it's a close-knit family, they'll hopefully sit down and have a civil conversation. And hopefully also, even more so, is they already are aware of things going on because they're talking to mom or dad and they're letting them know kind of what's been going on. But, you know, if it's all top secret and they're finding it out for the first time, and the parents try to almost put on a little, you know, front, if you will, during the holidays and try to skate through it so they can continue on, you know, with how they've been doing things, it's really to everybody's detriment.
Yeah. And it's normal to want to step it up you know, and cover up, you know, because a lot of times people know things might be slipping a little bit, but everybody wants to fit in. Everyone wants to be independent. Everyone wants to be treated the same. They don't want having somebody looking at them sideways or double checking everything they're doing. And so I think all of us do that throughout our lives, you know, to fit in. But, you know, then there becomes this sometimes a safety issue. And I know, John, with you had like a health emergency that really kind of slapped you in the face when you were caring for Virginia, that kind of forced you and the family to like, okay, we really have to regroup now. And
I was just thinking of that, Lori, because I had a heart attack in 2016, and we lived in a cooperative, and no, fully independent, no healthcare or anything. And it was the fourth one. That was the fourth one I've had over a 30-year period. I only have them about every 10 years or so. But the family just panicked because Virginia could not live alone then. And the assisted living facility that we moved to eventually was just under construction, and all 5 of them got behind me with like a full court press. And I kept telling them, I can't afford it. You're going to bankrupt me. Whine. But anyhow, we did move, and we moved in there. Shortly after we moved in, they had a happy hour there. They had an accordion player, very good entertainer. Virginia's head was a bobbing, and she was enjoying herself. I snapped a little video and sent it to the kids, and I said, you know, we might enjoy it here. There was a sigh of relief all over North America, because I'd put the guilt complex on them for forcing us old folks into a home.
Well, it is scary, you know, it's such a major decision, and all the what ifs, and everyone tries to dot the I's and cross the T's and do what's best. And, you know, but people worry about, you know, will they fit in? You know, were we just given a sales pitch? Are they really going to do everything they're telling us?
Yeah.
You know, those things all come into play. One of the things I wanted to talk about too, because when this happens, when this you know, parenting roles start reversing, it can come from a lot of different angles. So, you know, it can come from driving. All of a sudden someone's like, there's a few more dings in the car, or why aren't there tabs, you know, updated, or why is there so much mail on the dining room table? And, you know, if they have access to banking accounts, it's like, well, they're really donating to a lot of charities, you know, and everything that comes in the mail. It can be, you know, we had mentioned the food, it can be the housing, it can be the doctors, the medications. Was there, and travel? I mean, it's lifestyle. It's a little bit of everything. And sometimes it's, what I have found from talking to people and just from personal experience, you know, the major things come first, but then everything is kind of assessed, you know, but that's my personality type. You know, it's like, if I start checking here, sometimes it leads to other areas that I just want to make sure, you know, with my parents, I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. And they
want to be assured that you don't have unsafe practices.
Oh, exactly. And that was, even when they got their paperwork done, I brought them to, who was like the top attorney at the time here in Minnesota, who was a friend of mine. And Chris Major said, I'm going to ask you to leave now, Lori, and I just want to talk to your parents alone. And my parents were like, oh, no, she can be. No, we need to have some hard conversations on each and every one of your kids. And she does not need to be part of that, because you need to talk openly. And my parents were very, very comfortable with me. And they're like, she knows everything. She knows all of our thoughts and how we feel and what's going on. So I was really privileged to sit in on that conversation, because I never thought about the questions that would be posed. Like, you know, how likely are they going to get divorced? You know, is anybody an alcoholic? Is there a gambler in the family? Any affairs that you think are going? I mean, there was a whole list of questions about how stable are the marriages or the relationships, because that person is going to influence your child if you put them, in control of things. And I hear that a lot. I don't know if you do, Lance, where a lot of times it's not the child, but it's their partner who's leading the horse in the pack. And, they don't have the connection that the child does, but they're the lead horse in the situation. And so that can get really interesting. Other times I've seen it too, where the in-laws are blocked to not have an opinion because it's not their parent, and yet they're more probably grounded than the kids are and more objective in terms of what's there, or sometimes even have a better skill level to seek out resources and overall things. So there's no set pattern. There's no book for dummies on all of this stuff. It really, like John said earlier, it's a trial and error, and you just kind of step into it and move forward.
Yeah, and there needs to be, I think, some balance, because just because you're old, you shouldn't have to stop living. And my attitude is, I could be called tomorrow, but I'm going to be living good right up until that last minute. Yeah. And I have a good friend that is facing, I think, child parenting. This person had heart valve surgery 4 years ago, and the family, not my friend, but the family have made a cardiac cripple out of her. They're afraid to do anything for fear, oh, Mom, you may have another. Sure, she may have another one, but my attitude, and I try to convince her that if you got your car out of a body shop after an accident, you don't quit driving it for fear you might have another accident.
Yep.
Very true.
You don't quit living just because you might have another heart attack.
Well, and life is full of risks from the day we pop out of the womb, and there's no guarantees. So it's about, putting up kind of bumper pads, for safety. But again, there's got to be fun and joy and engagement. You don't want to end up locking somebody in a house where because sometimes I think the kids' paranoia can wear off on the parent or the aunt or uncle, whoever they're caring for. And now they're scared to do these things that something might happen, or I'm not, if you hear you're not capable enough, you're going to start believing that, even though you were totally capable, before. So that's an excellent point. I have one other question before I throw it back to Lance, and that is, now that you have lost Virginia, how do you cope living alone? I know so many people struggle with the loss of a spouse and the holiday traditions that they had. Do you still struggle with that? I know you have someone else now in your life, but that was such a long history there.
I think it would be, except that I'm very busy with hobbies, and I think they're a godsend. And now there was a period after Virginia's passing where I probably didn't do anything that didn't last a long time, because it's kind of how my daughter phrased it when I asked her if she would be able to give the eulogy without breaking down. She said, Dad, we've been mourning for 12 years. And that kind of, I think, was the process of me. Yeah, it hurt deeply, but that hurt had been spread over 12 years, so it didn't shut my life down very long, just for a little while. And so I do keep very busy.
Yeah, you are definitely a social creature. And if you got a problem, this guy's the fixer. He's the entertainer. He has jokes. He does. You just share so much, so gracious.
Loneliness, it could, they say it's a killer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Lance, do you have any things you want to add into the points I threw out to John?
Yeah. Thanks, Lori. John, I just want to kind of go back a little bit because, being a parent of younger children, one of the things I do for my kids is I videotape every aspect of their life, and they don't really get it right now, but I said, when you're my age, you'll enjoy probably having these memories. But the other side of it too is every Christmas it gets a little bit sadder because they're 1 year closer to probably going out on their own and having their own families, and then we'll start new traditions. Do you ever feel somewhat out of the picture now that your kids have children and grandchildren to focus on during the holidays? How do you handle that?
Indeed. Well, I have to handle it because that is the fact. We still have family gatherings, but not on the holiday. It's during the holiday season, because the thing that's different is the holiday, they're with their own children and grandchildren.
Okay.
The other thing that we notice, older people, if there is a family gathering, you'll find yourself sitting alone for a while because the cousins and the siblings have a lot in common, and they're very engaged in conversation, and we can sit there for 30 minutes or so being ignored, and we just have to learn to accept that. That is the norm now.
So it's not bothersome.
No.
Oh, that's good. Good to know. How about your own thoughts and, looking back and reminiscing? Do your thoughts ever frequently go back to your holidays now that your kids, or go back to your holidays as a young parent when you have to put together those toys that have 100 pieces and,
set up at night, and then, we would have a little social time together after the kids were all to bed, and toast a eggnog or something after we got the toys put together. And I learned how to talk without profanity after putting toys together. But yeah, there's a lot of times. And then seeing the excitement of the children on Sunday morning. Now, they're all senior citizens now, but I still reminisce back to the excitement of seeing them pop out of bed. And one of the traditions we used to have as the kids got to be teenagers, we would go to church Christmas Eve, and then we'd come home and have a chili supper, and then open gifts. Well, our two daughters thought we'd ought to have a little spiritual gathering first after dinner, so they'd sit down at the piano and play Christmas songs, and the boys would just be mad as can be. They want to get at the presents.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
About 35 years later, we were at my daughter's house and for Christmas Eve, and she did the same thing, just to jerk her brother's chain.
Well, that's what sisters are for.
Right.
Now that your kids are out of the house and, have been for probably several years now, I'm just curious, do you still decorate around your home as you did when you still had your spouse or when you had your young family?
No, I haven't had a Christmas tree in years, and I just don't think of it. I don't have anyone to share that with.
Yeah.
Until a couple of years ago, I used to hang a wreath on the door, but I haven't even done that this year because it's something about decorating for the holidays. It's something you kind of like to share. It was a shared thing. Virginia and I used to have a lot of fun doing that.
Oh, how fun.
I don't have the desire to do it anymore.
Well, and it's a lot of work.
A lot of work, yeah.
And you got a store and you got a hall, and and so it's fun and it's pretty, but it can be messy, if you get a real tree versus a fake tree.
You don't have the same desire to overcome that burden of the work and whatever. If you were getting a lot of enjoyment out of it, like you did when you had a spouse and children, yeah, you don't mind doing the extra work doing, but now why do it? That's kind of it.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very common for many people. And the younger, I think, generations don't always understand why not, because it's not, to them, maybe it's not as much work or it's easier to do. But I mean, I know even for myself, I'm really starting to struggle just like with arthritis in my hands. And it's like, I don't have the strength and the pain and all of those things that they add up, in terms of what you want to do or how you want to do it. and has an impact. But I think people overlook those things because people don't talk about those things. And so you look the same, so why would you not, so yeah, those are interesting comments. I wanted to mention, when you were talking about sometimes you could be at a gathering and be sitting alone, maybe for 30 minutes. Do you ever reflect? I mean, because sometimes I know it's hard to be left out, but do you ever like eavesdrop and then just kind of think, oh, that's kind of cool, everybody's getting along too, because you had something to do with that,
right?
I guess family, because not all families get along.
That's true.
Yeah, I am proud of my family. They are loving people. They all were very supportive during our journey, and so yeah, and I'm not offended by being somewhat isolated at a family gathering, because we had one I think it was in September when my daughter from Canada was here, and they were just having a rollicking good time, and good to see you, Mom and Dad. Good to see you, Grandpa and Grandma, or Grandma, Grandpa. Yeah, they don't see Grandma anymore, and then they'd give us that acknowledgement, and then go visit with their siblings or their cousins or something, and we don't have a lot in common to visit about anymore.
Yeah. Well,
but it is hard. You have to be kind of comfortable in your own skin in that situation.
Yeah. Well, and then you don't want them maybe even listening to this and go, okay, now someone's got to babysit Grandpa the whole time and feel like you're being assigned, or.
Yeah, they do that enough before the holiday. They don't have to do it there.
Because you want it to be authentic and loving and organic. I think most people do, and that's always a concern again. And I think many times family members don't even realize what that can look like or feel like to a senior person when it's, all of a sudden someone pops up and someone else sits down. It's like, well, it's pretty evident you guys got this scheduled out,
Right. One of the siblings or cousins said to the other one, "Oh, you should go over and talk to your dad." Or yeah, but and I think some people are hurt by that, and I've heard people bemoaning that. I kind of look at it rather entertaining. It's like watching a soap opera.
Well, that's interesting. Lance, were there other questions that you wanted to ask John, or you want me to go ahead?
I just one quick question, John. You have a lot of wisdom, a lot of life experience, and a large family.
One of the two.
Well, you picked which one. But if you had to give a piece of advice to maybe a spouse out there who's going through the holiday season and their loved one has dementia, what piece of advice would you give to them this holiday season?
Oh, boy, Lance, that's a tough one. I'd say take care of yourself first, because you can't be a good caregiver if you jeopardize your own health. And then I think the other thing would be just have an attitude of gratitude about what you had before you lost it. And in Virginia's case, I had her for 72 years almost, but I had her as an active, loving spouse for 66 years. Not many people have that that privilege. And so that thought, just be grateful for what you had and don't dwell on what you've lost, because you've lost it whether you dwell on it or not.
That's great advice.
That's great advice, John.
I think living with gratitude just makes life a lot easier because we don't have control over it, but we do have control over our choices and our thought patterns and things like that. And not that you don't have to go through a grieving process, and everyone's process is different and stuff, but sometimes people will kind of block out. Other people will, build shrines. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer with that, but I do think that gratitude piece just makes it easier to.
Yeah, and you have to accept that that's the hand you've been dealt.
Mhm.
If it was poker, you'd call for new cards, but you can dwell on what you've lost, but be very grateful if you have had a good time or a good life together. Be very grateful for that.
Mhm.
Not everybody does. There's a lot of dysfunctional families.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's for sure. One thing I missed asking you about was driving. You gave up your car, and then well, just tell your story about driving, because it was your car, and I think it was your son's car, and then it was no car, and what that process was like for you, and how those decisions came to be.
Well, how it came to pass that I gave up driving, I didn't because of health or anything. But my son took a job in Manhattan and he had a new car and stored it. And I kept that indoor and I drove that and left my car outside. And in the wintertime, I'd start it once a week and it was cold. So finally, I sold the darn thing thinking he'd never come back. Well, then he came back. I suppose it's only reasonable he'd want his car back. Yeah. And so I was 90 years old at the time and I had to think, do I want to buy another car for $35,000 to $45,000 when I may only be driving another year or two? Let's give this Uber Lyft a thing, and I have, and I like that. And now my friend is finally out of a little pressure from me and pressure for her family giving up her car. And I told her, you'd be like an aristocrat. You'd have a chauffeur delivering you around. But one of the funny things, I took her to the hospital one time and it was late. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I took her home and then I grabbed her car because I had to get medication the next day. My daughter found out about it. She said, Dad, were you driving? Yes. Well, yes, that's how I got where I wanted to go. But Dad, you're 90 at that time. You're 94. I said, well, that's a number. But the state of Minnesota allows me to drive. But and she was concerned, and I understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's an interesting thing, driving. I know I've had several friends who have had that conversation with their folks, and one, their dad went through the neighbor's fence, their fence, and
Yeah.
in somebody else's porch, and it started out with dings, and it was like the more the family brought it up, the more glued to the steering wheel he was, and then then it got down to, no, you can't do this anymore. It was
An interesting side effect to that. My oldest son says, do you realize how much liability you're in driving her car? So, and that's something people may not realize. I bought non-owner auto insurance after he pressured me into it. It's fairly cheap, gives you all of the same benefits that an auto policy does. And so it has the same limits, things like that.
yeah, because you really do need that for yourself,
Right.
so they don't
And
go after you personally.
He was giving me good counsel.
Uh-huh. Well, that's good. Anything else that you want to? I have a couple more questions, but I wanted to go back to this one because I didn't really give you a chance to talk. We talked a little bit about housing and the changing there. What about doctors and medications? Did family kind of ease their way into that, in terms of, a lot of times with healthcare directives, they can be assigned so they can, communicate with the doctor and kind of stay on top of medications?
Well, I didn't have any pressure to do that. I did do it on my own with the help of an attorney, and then so often you hear of people dying and leaving all of their affairs in a mess. We have, well, in the first place, I have no real estate. They have to dispose over cars now. My son can settle my estate in 15, 20 minutes because all of the beneficiaries are named in our financial things. So it's not going to take long. But what we did do is created a spreadsheet under a password, and I update it periodically with all account numbers, passwords, and what have you, and send that to the two oldest children, and then they delete the old one, and we keep that as current as possible. And they aren't going to have to dig through shoe boxes and things like that to find out what bills are unpaid.
Yeah. Did you give them passwords too? Do you have social media? Because that's a big hornet's nest nowadays too.
Yeah, well, Apple has this new, I forget what they called it, where you file with them, and they have access to all of your intellectual assets
Mm-hmm.
or your information technology assets.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. I wanted to ask you, you've got a little lady friend now that you've been seeing for quite a while. And a lot of times that can cause friction within families of, what are you doing? And they don't like this other person coming in. Sometimes they're worried about, gold diggers, or, how's that going to affect
Scams.
Yep. There can be the scams, the inheritance. I mean, everybody's coming from different angles and stuff. And some families are open arms and, mom or dad is happy. This is fantastic. And others are, really leery of that. How did that work for your kids and for hers?
Well, my daughter was shocked when she discovered her accidentally, when I was showing some pictures to her granddaughters, and accidentally she got to see where all of my pictures are. But they are the best of friends now, and my family has really embraced my friend, and I'm 2/3 along the way of my friend's family, and a little more than that, and I kind of understand where she's coming from, but about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, my friend was looking at a place here, beautiful apartment overlooking the park there, and she was so excited about it, and her daughter found out about it, just raised Cain with her and discouraged her from it. And she told her brothers that she thought I was trying to influence her. Well, she should know that lady well enough to know that you're not going to influence that Irish woman if she doesn't want to be influenced. But one of the kind of funny little side effects, it was a big party at where she lives, where I used to live. They have an anniversary, so everybody was together. So I'm going. But in the meantime, I had just gotten this check back from or I got the cash from that scam. And so I went over early, and only one of the family members were there, and that was the daughter that has a little question about me. In fact, she asked her mother, "What do you see in him?" And I wondered the same thing myself. Anyhow, I gave her that check, and then I got to thinking about it afterwards. Does she think I'm borrowing money from her? Mm-hmm. So, but Virginia's cousin got boombozzled. He was quite wealthy by a sweetheart scam. And I asked his daughter if there was financial exploitation. She says, big time. And I think that's a common worry when you see your adult or your parents dating. What's the motivation? We are on a speaking basis now with the daughter.
Well, that's great. And it is.
We had a dinner recently, and Irene was here, and she called her daughter, and I could hear a little bit of the others said, "We're going to have dinner. I'd like to have you come. It'd be just the three of us." And there was, "Oh, all right." And we engaged in conversation. She gave me a ride home. So, boy, I'm making progress.
Well, and depending on the relationship with the child, sometimes they're just used to their one-on-one and they don't want that changed, and are extremely overprotective. And again, it's that balance of risk and reward of life. And I think I think this happens in all of life, when we look for problems, we'll find problems. Mm-hmm. But when we look and go, are they happy? And it's like, yeah, they really are. And not that you don't have to look at the other person or the situations around them, but it's got to be, it's just more helpful if it can be a balanced look. And if you can have a discussion on top of it, instead of everyone, kind of sneaking around, keeping their thoughts to themselves, that can parlay into a big mess later on down the road.
One of my friend's sons, the three of us were in a conversation, and I brought up the subject that we're of the opinion that having a relationship and companions might lengthen your life.
Mm-hmm.
And he agreed with that and said he was happy for it.
Yeah, I think there's a
and
lot.
I kind of believe that. I don't know if you can prove it statistically, but loneliness, I see it where I live. I see it where my friend lives. A lot of people have their families are busy. They don't see their family. They just live a lonely life.
Mm-hmm. And some people have lived all their life like that. They've just kind of self-isolated, and so that's their routine. But a lot of times, especially if a move has taken place, people can not feel comfortable, because it's kind of like going back to high school with the different cliques in the communities and things like that. It can be a little bit intimidating if someone hasn't done that. And it happens a lot. I know when I was selling real estate, people wouldn't realize how lonely they were in their house because all the neighbors had moved. They're thinking about all, when all the kids had their birthday parties together, and, they would, get together to watch the football games, or they'd go to t-ball, and they would have all of those things of interest. But then you look out the window and those people aren't there anymore. And those engagement pieces and events aren't happening. And so a lot of times when people will end up moving into a community, they are shocked at, kind of re-entering life in a
do you remember you hosted a panel discussion over at the library a few years ago about, is it time to move?
Mm-hmm.
And so often people will put that off because the most exciting thing for them is when the mail truck comes, whereas in a building like this, you've got a lot of social activity.
Yeah.
And people are missing out on that, particularly if they're alone.
Yeah.
John has to leave some of our Zoom meetings for happy hour, or he's doing presentations, maybe even at a different community and stuff. This guy is so busy. I can't ever picture you being alone. Really, you're just always.
But I do think that is good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just this morning we had a 1-hour session where we're filming these veterans. And we did that just before I come up here. And then this afternoon, I'm showing a video. But I do think that's good for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I think there's been lots of studies on the evidence of living a purposeful life, and feeling engaged, for sure. And, wasn't it the Surgeon General who said we have an isolation crisis, a loneliness crisis going on in all generations,
Mm-hmm.
Not just our elders, but our young kids are even feeling this, which is really sad in this day and age. But, their thumbs do the talking, and they're not doing the face-to-face stuff as much as we all did growing up and stuff. So, as far as your personal health right now, do you feel like when people get together with your family that they're kind of observing how you're doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And kind of coddling.
Does that give you
a classic case is when we went to Croatia, my son and a bunch of his friends had chartered a yacht, and they invited us to go along. And about a week before we came, he sent me a text, and he said, "Dad, I made arrangements where you and Irene could have the 2 rooms up on the salon deck where you won't have to climb the stairs." I thought that was so sweet of him. But you see that deferral. We went to Orchestra Hall the other night, and we had to go up a stairway. We started for the stairway, and Folks, there's an elevator over here. We hadn't said we needed an elevator, but they perceived that we did.
Yeah, well, and some people do need it and won't ask,
Right.
so but again, it's one of those things. Do you get offended or do you just appreciate?
No, I kind of chuckled at it.
Yeah, I can see you doing that. I can see you sprinting up the steps going, no.
just to show off.
Yep. Yep. Well, good. Well, this has been just I think, a great conversation. Hopefully others have gleaned some insights that there's no right or wrong. Everyone's situation is different, but, you have a right to state your opinions. If you're a senior and if the family's getting a little bit more involved, if you're feeling it and they're not talking to you, bring up the conversation. To kind of get back in control of what is happening, because sometimes the mix can take over, and that's not a good situation.
There is that balance between a genuine concern or a legitimate concern for safety and the right to let some people enjoy some life left while they still just in their final days. That's kind of our attitude is that we know at 95 and 94, you don't have a lot of time left, but let's enjoy it while we're here, because we sure can't when we're gone.
Well, you don't know. No, you don't know what's going on up there. But, the other thing I was going to mention too, and now it just left my mind. What the heck was it? Totally lost it. Oh, well. So as it goes, I'm 65, so my daughter will be watching me.
Are you an apprentice senior citizen or a senior citizen on probation? Meaning you got to qualify, you got to prove your ability.
I think I'm an apprentice right now and stuff, but there's moments I think where they look at me and go, I don't know what's going on with her, but I can look at them and do the same thing too, and they're in their 30s. So.
If adult children of senior parents could just listen a little bit to the parents and let them take a little risk with your parents to keep them happy.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's really good advice. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Any last comments that you want to leave with our audience in terms of, hey, if you're going through this or if you think it's coming down the pike, here's a couple of tips for you.
Not really. Well, I think accept it and not be surprised by it, and then understand the motivation is probably love and concern with your safety. And I think it's well to accept that and not fight it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I found, when I was helping people with a lot of transitions, again, in my real estate days, and I still see it now in this position that I'm in, is that kids don't bring up their loss of sleep or the amount of worry. They don't talk about the safety. They'll say, well, it's a safety issue, but they don't say how that safety issue is affecting them emotionally. And I think once I know what I've experienced with my own parents and with many other clients is once that is communicated, it's like it's a relief. Oh, they're not trying to take control over my life. It does get back to that love and that they do care. And I had no idea it was affecting them or they were losing sleep over this and, those types of things. And, that's just coming from a whole different angle than you want to take over my portfolio type deal, which sometimes people go down that route and think
it's interesting. I experience it sitting here. We'll have coffee and sit around a circle of 5 or 6 people. And it's surprising how much of the conversation is, well, my daughter, I got to ask my daughter if I can do that. Or well, my son said that I should. You see examples of that parenting, reverse parenting. It is common. It's almost an epidemic.
Yeah. Well, and there's a fine line between, almost a codependency type thing and a taking over where you've disabled somebody from making decisions on their own because they don't want to ruffle feathers on the other end too. And then, I have one friend right now who's kind of going through it, and he's like, it's still my life. It's my decisions, and I don't feel like I'm being included as much as I should be. Even though I'll probably agree with a lot of what they say, I still want to be involved in the process of it. And so that's the one thing sometimes I worry about, is that we almost disable people, thinking that they can't make solid decisions without, knocking on the door and going, okay, what do you think? When they were totally independent before. And so often,
how many won't make a decision now without clearing it with their new parents.
Yep. Well, and because they're worried about backlash.
And what is that slogan? It's easier to seek forgiveness than permission.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Lance, any other questions that you have? Otherwise, I think we're good to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm just grateful, John, for all the wisdom you shared in your story, and kind of a real firsthand experience of going through the holidays, and what people will face as they get older, and the changing of traditions, but still maintaining your identity, right? And not, like you said, developing that codependency on your children, and kind of still making decisions for yourself while you're able to, right? And I think that's important. And you were talking about people that just kind of give up, but Lori kind of mentioned it, but having a purpose is so important. You got to have that purpose and that meaning for getting up and going about your day and moving forward. And just appreciate your time with us here on Conscious Caregiving with L&L.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Yeah, this has been very enlightening. I think it'll help a lot of people. So thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us again here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.